Tens of thousands of demonstrators have taken to the streets across France in a 10th day of national protests. Demonstrators are rallying against the government's pension reform plan, which was pushed through Parliament earlier this month. This was the scene in the city of Nantes as flaming barriers were set up in the streets. Images like these have been repeated across France again today as protesters block public spaces and choke off key roadways. And the CBC's Chris Brown is on this story for us. He joins me now from Paris, where some of the biggest protests have been taking place. Hey, Chris, so we've seen some massive crowds at these protests. What's the scene where you are right now?
Well, it's pretty noisy. Some guy just walked past me with like a ghetto blaster and blew my ears out. So there's lots and lots of noise here. Drums, people banging on pots and pans, and of course, lots of signs of the unions that are taking part in this general strike today. We're talking hundreds of unions, you name it, from university teachers to medical workers to people who work in offices to assembly line workers. Impossible to say where we are here exactly what the crowd is in France, but as I say, or in Paris, it is large. Last week they had anywhere from 1 million to 3 million. That's a big variation depending who you talk to, but they were hoping to get nearly that many today, and my hunch is that they're going to come pretty close. This is all because France's government and the president in particular is trying to make people work 2 more years than they do now to collect their pension from 62 to 64. Emmanuel Macron says that's because the pension plan simply can't afford it. Many people here disagree, and it's become really a quality of life issue. There's a pretty funny one right here. That's Emmanuel Macron sticking his head out of a garbage can. There he goes there. And the garbage can in many ways has become a bit of a symbol of these protests, because there's lots of garbage all around Paris' streets. They haven't been picked up. There's mountains of garbage, and they're kind of playing on that, Arthi.
And Chris, despite the scene we're seeing right now, of course, how much these demonstrations have really suffocated main areas of the city, President Macron has been refusing calls to reconsider his pension reform. So what is he saying about this latest round of protests?
We haven't heard from him today. He was supposed to meet King Charles, and I'm just going to step up here, get out of the way. He was supposed to meet King Charles, visiting from London at the Palace of Versailles, so a very kingly event for perhaps a couple of kings, but that didn't happen. And so the protesters say, well, that's one humiliation for Macron, who, again, has not really given much, if any, on this. It's important to note that this crowd here of the union members, it has been, you can hear it. They're pretty happy. They're singing songs. It's not been a violent crowd. But the worry, and what we saw last week, is that all that changed later in the afternoon. Once it got closer to nighttime, there were restaurants and stores set on fire here. Lots of tear gas, rock throwing, a really, really bad scene. And so, no one here says they want to see that. But it's actually the combination of what you're seeing here now with this crowd and the violence that is putting a lot of pressure on the government. This law is actually very close to being finalized. It's made it through the parliament, but not been proclaimed. And so the people here are hoping that that little, small bit of room they have before proclamation might still be enough time for this legislation to be changed, Arthi.
Chris, thank you for taking us directly to the scene. We appreciate that. That is Chris Brown in Paris.